Because China's eating our lunch right now. And they went away from what I was doing. They're eating our lunch.
We've been feeding them a long time.
Well, tough words from the president and the presumptive GOP nominee after President Biden slapped China with tough new tariffs on $18 billion worth of Chinese imports, including batteries, steel, aluminum, chips, and semiconductors. The order quadrupling the import tax on Chinese electric vehicles from 25% to 100%, saying the move will protect key American industries from cheaper Chinese goods that could wipe out competition. Well, China calling that announcement typical political manipulation and saying the U.S. should immediately correct its wrongdoing. I'm going to bring back my panel here. LZ, Kaivan, Ramesh, and joining us is ABC's senior White House correspondent Selena Wang. So, Selena, how big of an impact will these tariffs have on both the American industry and, of course, on Americans' pocketbooks?
Yeah, Kana, well, look, the Biden administration claims that these tariffs are targeted and strategic, so they're not going to have an impact on inflation. They say this is all about protecting American industries from what they argue are unfairly underpriced products from China because of subsidies from the government. So that is what the Biden administration is saying. But of course, there's dispute from various trade groups and economists who say this will, in fact, worsen inflation. The Biden team is keeping in place the Trump-era tariffs on some $300 billion worth of goods, and studies have shown that U.S. consumers are the ones who largely bore the brunt of those tariffs. You have groups like the National Retail Federation who say these tariffs are just a tax on consumers and it will raise prices at a time when people are already dealing with inflation.
Certainly. And so then, I mean, that leads me to my next question here. What will the effect will this have now on the already tense U.S.-China relationships?
Well, yeah, Kenny, you just mentioned at the top of the show that Beijing is slamming this move as political manipulation. They claim this is another example of the U.S. trying to contain their rise in technology and their supremacy in that space. So, look, this move does also raise the risk of escalation when it comes to the trade war, because Beijing is already threatening to retaliate, with President Biden saying in an interview earlier today that he does expect Beijing to retaliate in some way. That all being said, Kana, this is not a surprise to the Chinese government. They knew this was coming, so I do expect the reaction to be contained.
All right, Selena, thank you. And Ramesh, to you, how are Republicans spinning this as President Biden is essentially affirming the tariffs that President Trump put into place when he was in office?
Well, that's basically what the Republicans are saying, because it happens to be true, and also because Republicans aren't really clear nowadays on where they stand, whether they want to attack this, as they would have in the old days, as a tax increase on American consumers and businesses, or if they want to attack him just as aping President Trump. Fact is, we've now had 2 administrations in a row that are tariff happy, but not particularly strategic about it.
Mm-hmm. And Kaivan, how do you see this playing out for President Biden, especially in the polls when you look at some of these battleground states? We keep talking about the Rust Belt here, but also the fact that, you know, he's trailing significantly in these polls, but now this might also hurt consumers. So how do they navigate that?
Well, I think it's interesting because we've heard so much talk about the importance of being tough on China, and Biden's gotten tough on China, and this is the latest example, but obviously there's the forced sale of TikTok bill as well. Trump has really done the opposite. I mean, he made millions of dollars in office from China. His daughter got all those patents from China, and he's on China's side when it comes to TikTok. So I do think he's going to try to draw out a contrast here and really flip the narrative like we saw with the border bill.
And LZ, for you, from the consumer standpoint here, I mean, do these tariffs really work? Is it a political game here? Or does it simply raise the prices for Americans?
Well, I think from an American perspective, we need to take the long view with this technology when it comes to China. You may remember, Kana, back in the late 70s, Carter actually had solar panels in the White House. Reagan took them down, and what happened in the meantime? China rose in terms of technology with solar paneling, and if you add American solar panel manufacturers today, they will tell you how China is dominating in that industry. Fast forward to where we are now, and we're having this conversation about electric vehicles. So I do think there is some strategy. I don't know if this is going to play out for voters come November, but in terms of what's best for the American people going forward, having a foothold in this new technology will be beneficial to us, and we don't believe that. Just look what happened to us with the solar panels.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, LZ, Kaivan, Ramesh, and Selena, our thanks to all of you. And coming up in our last call here, it doesn't matter if you're of drinking age. There's a bar in Ohio that says it will only serve an older crowd on its busiest nights. No exceptions. My panel weighs in after the break.